Hi, I'm Vivek Madala.
And I'm David Poe.
And we recorded the new theme song for the Scooby-Doo and Guess Who series.
And you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah!
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
I'll teach you to meddle in my affairs.
Quick, Scoob, do something!
I'm trying.
Gee, Uncle Scoob, if you want to open the door, all you gotta do is push.
No!
Hello, and welcome to episode 42 of the podcast. On this installment of the show, I have another conversation with yet another individual who has worked in some capacity on some iteration of the 50-plus year franchise over the course of its existence. And if you checked out the title before clicking on this episode to listen to it, you are already aware that said individual is none other than Tom Cook. Now, if you're not super familiar with Tom or his background, we're going to fill in all of those blanks over the course of the conversation. But the TLDR is basically Tom started out as an animator, an assistant animator, basically doing in-betweens at Hanna-Barbera in the late 70s. Worked on shows like Challenge of the Super Friends, Godzilla, and of course, Scooby-Doo. Did some time at Ruby Spears, did some time at Filmation. We do talk a little bit about He-Man. I got the impression that his time at He-Man was a really good one, and so it kind of naturally worked its way into our discussion. I was never a big He-Man fan. It was not really available in my area. It was not on television. I knew it was out there. I'd seen the toys. I'd seen the ads, but it just never really made an impact on me. And I know it's like this huge cultural, it has this huge cultural footprint for a lot of people. It was just something that passed me by. So if you're a He-Man fan, you're going to get a little bit of He-Man love over the course of this conversation as well. Also, a lot of kind of behind the scenes discussion about the medium itself, a lot of process talk. Tom and I actually got, I think, more into process than anything else, as well as tried to get as much kind of HB history out of him as I could, such is my way. So anyways, I won't take up any more of your time. I hope you all enjoy it, and without further ado, I give to you my conversation with Tom Cook. See you on the other side. My guest today is an animator who has certainly done his time in the trenches, working for studios like Hanna-Barbera, Filmation, and Sony Animation throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He played a part in bringing to life various and sundry characters from our childhoods to life, including Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, He-Man, the Super Friends, both versions of Ghostbusters, and the 90s iteration of Godzilla. I would like to welcome to the podcast, Tom Cook. Glad to have you on the show, Tom.
Hey, good to be here.
Now, I was curious, initially, I contacted you because of the Scooby connection, but noticing that you'd worked on like Extreme Ghostbusters and Godzilla, I was obviously much older at the time, but those were franchises that I was very interested in, and cartoons that I think are very underrated and don't get the attention they deserve. So I was kind of excited to see that you'd worked on those.
Yeah, Godzilla was, the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla was early on. That's when I got the job at Hanna-Barbera in 1978. And I had no idea that the show was going to be as popular as it was. I really sell, a lot of Godzilla stuff, and I never really anticipated that. As for Extreme Ghostbusters, I got to direct a few episodes of that, and it was kind of cool working on something that had like the first, handicapped character with the guy in the wheelchair.
That's right. Forgot about that guy. I feel terrible that I don't remember any of their names because I loved that show when it was out. I actually used to balance. My daughter would watch Teletubbies, and then I would watch Extreme Ghostbusters afterwards. So I'd watch Teletubbies with her, and then she would watch Extreme Ghostbusters with me.
Yeah, I kind of did the same thing with my daughter.
I was such a huge fan of the real Ghostbusters back in the day, so having it come back was pretty cool.
Yeah, I had worked on the there was a Slimer show, and I worked just freelance. I just worked a few episodes freelance on that show, but that was kind of like my touch with the real Ghostbusters. But the main thing for me was the Filmation Ghostbusters. I worked on every episode of that.
So there's clearly some stuff missing from your IMDb page.
Yeah. If you go to my IMDb page, what happens is if you are a contractor, they don't give you credit. And early on, I didn't get a lot of credit for when I was an assistant animator when I first started. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that just don't show up on the IMDb page just because of the way they run the thing. I've contacted them a few times and told them, I worked on this, I worked on that, but they really are hesitant to put you on there if they can't prove it. And, I finally just said, look, why would I lie? These are the things I worked on. And, whether I was an assistant animator or not, we just didn't get credits in the credits. And that's what the thing was. They couldn't see my name.
Yeah. Especially with those older shows. I know a lot of people I've spoken to, they've said that they've just kind of given up because with those older shows, it's just so hard to track. They know what they worked on.
Yeah, well, and that's what I do too. I list my stuff when I am looking for works at, if I to go to a Comic-Con or whatever, I always list everything I worked on. And I carry prints of most of the things I worked on. And, if people question, it's like, look, that's what I worked on. I don't care if it's not on the IMDb page or not, that it's still got my stamp on it.
I remember a story that Mark Evanier, who's a previous guest and friend of the show, he said that he was actually hired by Hanna-Barbera to basically sit down and watch the shows and identify voice actors and anyone else he could identify because they were giving, under whatever the new arrangements with unions were at the time, they had to pay royalties. And because they didn't give credit, they had no idea who had actually worked on the shows. So
right.
His job was to basically sit and watch cartoons and write down all the appearances of people.
And then you never realized that Mark did so many voices. That's a joke.
Oh, okay.
No, that's like
I see
he would get paid.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah, that's me. That's me. Yeah.
All right. So I usually start the interview with the same question that I ask everybody, and that is, how did you first come to Scooby-Doo? Were you somebody who watched it back in the day during its original run? Are you someone who came to it professionally? What was the touch point for you?
Yeah, well, the whole way I got into the animation business was kind of strange. I was, I guess it was around 1975. I was a bus driver, a transit bus driver in Los Angeles. And my route used to take me from the San Fernando Valley into Hollywood. So I went past the Hanna-Barbera building, 2 or 3 times a day. And always loved cartoons, grew up. My heyday was like Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw, early Flintstones, and Jetsons, because I was around 10 years old in the early 60s. And so that was kind of my wheelhouse. And then there was a TV show called Top Cat, and that's the one that I really loved because they always called him TC, and of course my initials are TC. So that's kind of what even my email address, one of my email addresses has Top Cat in it. But so what happened was I was it was my day off, and this is probably late 78. No, late 77 or early 78. I went out to get the mail, and it was just a bunch of junk mail, which I normally just throw right in the trash. And for some reason this day I didn't. I threw it on my kitchen table. And I sat down to eat a sandwich that I had made for myself and saw this little pamphlet. And I said, hey, I'll just kind of flip through this pamphlet while I'm eating. And it ended up being the extension classes that were being offered at Cal State Northridge. I think at that time it was San Fernando Valley State College, but so I just started flipping through this thing, and I noticed this comic book class that was going to be offered in the summertime. Now, I never took any classes at San Fernando Valley State or anything ever before, but I saw this comic book class, and I was interested in comic books, and I saw that the teacher's name was Don Rico. And Don Rico was a comic book artist, worked on Captain America, and I think he was even the art director for some time for Stan Lee at Marvel Comics in the 50s. And so I knew his name, and I just wanted to meet him. So I signed up for the class, and we brought in our portfolios, and all of my stuff was all pictures of Fantastic Four, Spider-Man and all that stuff from Marvel. And after the class, he said, could I talk to you for a minute? And I said, yeah, sure. And he goes, well, I work at Hanna-Barbera as a storyboard artist, and we're doing a show called Challenge of the Super Friends. They have a class to teach basic animation on Thursday nights over at the studio, and it's free, but you have to be recommended by one of the people in the studio. And I would like to recommend you for the class because I really like your superhero artwork. He said, we've got a lot of people who draw Fred and Barney and Scooby-Doo and stuff, but they're not really good with a human figure because Challenge of the Super Friends is going to have Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, which is a little bit more realistic looking. So I said, well, yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. So I started taking the class on Thursday nights, and after about 3 weeks, they ended up hiring 4 of us out of the class. There were about 30 people in the class, and I was one of the ones that they hired. So I never even dreamed that I would ever work in the animation industry. I never would have known how to even get into it. But, here I was being hired, thanks to my teacher. So it's just kind of a really odd way to get into the to the industry because I knew nothing about it really. And they said, you draw well, and that's all we care about. You'll sit with an animator and be his assistant, and then you'll learn from him. So, and that's what I did. Right out of the box, I worked on the new Fred and Barney show and Challenge of the Super Friends. And then soon after that was the Scooby and Scrappy show. And one of the Scooby-Doo movies, Scooby Goes to Hollywood.
So you said that you showed your portfolio. Were you into art? Were you an artist kind of independently before you started the class?
Well, I always, like I said, I was probably, 8 or 9 years old when Marvel Comics came out. When Spider-Man and Fantastic Four first hit in the early 60s. I always loved Batman, Superman, all those comics too, but when Spider-Man came out, that was my thing, and I just loved it. So I just started drawing, because of that, and never thought I would ever do anything with it. I didn't think I wanted to work in comic books because I just didn't really like doing backgrounds or anything like that. I like drawing the characters. So that was where my art came from, was from the comic books. And thankfully that the teacher saw me and said, we're doing Super Friends, so that was right up my alley. So it was like, it was just amazing to one day be driving a bus, and then 3 weeks later I'm working on Superman and Batman and Challenge of the Super Friends. So I was thrilled to death.
Did you you said you started as an assistant animator, and I was curious what kind of a role you played. Were you like a lot of art assistants in comic books? They'll do the backgrounds and they'll kind of like do the non-figural stuff that the artists kind of don't want to busy themselves with.
Yeah, in animation you've got a background department. They paint all the backgrounds, so the animator doesn't touch anything there. Since I was in the animation aspect of it, we were the ones that made the characters walk and talk and do whatever had to do in each scene. I was the assistant, which meant that the animator is the one they drew in a blue pencil, like a light blue pencil. And once they got the movement down, they would put a little chart and show where the in-betweens go. So I would do the in-betweens, and then I would also take their key drawings, and they're in blue pencil, but I would do them over in black pencil so that way it could be Xeroxed onto a cell. So they really kind of worked very rough, and then it was my job to clean it up and make it look like the character on model, etc., like that. So that was kind of my, the way I got into the animation part of everything was through basically cleaning up the animator's drawings and then doing the in-betweens.
Right.
And you learned a lot from that because you'd see what the animator's thought process was. You learned some of the timing, how many drawings it took to get something done. And so I was kind of a sponge, and every time I'd see something, I'd kind of study it rather than just going over and doing the work itself. I wanted to look and find out why the animator did what he did. And so that's why within the next 3 years, I ended up becoming an animator myself, because I learned and, tried a lot of things on my own. And then I would show the directors, and then they finally said, okay, you're ready to be an animator. So that's how I moved up to being a full animator.
I'd only ever heard of in-betweeners as being kind of like their own department. I didn't realize that was actually the animator's assistants doing that. Or was that how it was run back then?
Yeah, what has changed is like early on, early days at Disney, and even probably the early days of Hanna-Barbera, they had the animators, then you had somebody called a breakdown artist, and he would do the in-betweens kinda, but not totally clean, because you have to have some animation knowledge to be able to do the in-betweens correctly, because you have to know where the animator's taking things, because everything moves like an arc, and if you just took two drawings and drew something in the middle, it doesn't necessarily show you what the character's arm is going to be doing. You need all 6 or 7 drawings to see how that whole movement is going to take place. So the breakdown artists would break it down and give it to the cleanup artists, and then there was also somebody that just did the quick in-betweens that also were given to somebody else. So there were 3 or 4 different steps that eventually, when it came into the 70s and 80s, they were just called assistants. They just did everything. They would do the breakdowns, the cleanups, and the in-betweens.
And who did you first get assigned to?
Oh, it's a really nice guy. Well, I know he's got an IMDb page. His name is Rick Leon.
Okay.
He ended up being one of the lead animators, or maybe even a supervisor at Hanna-Barbera until they sent all the work over to Korea. But I lucked out because he was a really nice guy, and there were some animators that they really wouldn't stick you with them because they just would not treat you that well. Not because they were like really mean or anything, but they expected you to know a little bit more than I would have known with my background of absolutely zero. So Rick realized that I was totally green and never gave me anything that was really above my head. And if it was, he would take some time and explain it a little bit more fully than maybe some other animator would have. So it was great, and he was very patient because I made mistakes, and then I would have to fix them. But it was always like, hey, I've never done this before. I didn't know I was supposed to do that. So thankfully, like I say, he was a super good guy. So it was awesome work with him.
So you got a little on-hand mentoring as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I needed more than anything else, because I was terrified that I was just never going to be able to do this because I had literally no clue what I was doing. Somebody would say, here, do an in-between. And I was like, I really don't know what you're talking about, which is like unheard of. If you're an assistant animator, you're supposed to know what that is.
At that time, I know there's a period in like Hanna-Barbera's kind of history where, like you said, there were so many productions going on and farming the artwork out, and I've heard a few people make reference in stuff that I've read that a lot of the people working there, a lot of the directors and stuff, were people who'd been there for quite a long time, and they were aging, and their timing was kind of not as sharp as it maybe used to be as far as the storytelling and hitting the jokes and whatnot. And I was curious, you coming in around 78, 79, What was kind of the atmosphere at the time in terms of where the studio was at, like creatively?
Yeah, I would say that when I came in, it was pretty good. There were a number of people, like you said, that were older, but I wouldn't say they've lost. TV animation is nothing like the full animation of Disney Studios or anybody like that. So these guys, I know there was somebody that I think his name was Irv Spence that worked at Disney on some of those features, and there was a guy named Dave Tendler that I really looked up to because he worked on, I don't even know if you've heard of this. This is Gulliver's Travels back in the late 1930s. It came out the same time that Snow White did from Disney. So he was an animator on that, and then there was something called Hoppity Goes to Town, and these were done by the Fleischer Brothers. And, major features, there to compete with Disney. And Dave Tendler was working at Hanna-Barbera at that time, and I went over to him and just, soaked up as much as I could from him. And he was one of the older guys as well. But what really happened, it really wasn't that the older guys couldn't do it anymore. They were so busy that they had to hire people, frankly, like me, that didn't have any experience.
Yeah.
And they were forced into hiring people that really shouldn't have had the job just because of the output that they had to keep up. Thankfully I caught on and it took me the first 6 months before I finally caught on to what I was supposed to do and started doing a good job. But back in the 60s, they never would have hired somebody that didn't know how to do the job. So in that way, maybe some of the shows weren't quite as sharp as they should have been, but it really wasn't the animator's fault. It was the people that they had to hire to fill in. You don't want the animator doing the in-betweens, even though they could probably do them better than anybody, just because they are the ones that are talented and make things move so well. You want them focusing on the next scenes and let somebody else finish it up.
Right.
So that was kind of the thing, I think, anyway, because they had plenty of people that were terrific animators. Even with the limited animation that we were doing, some of it back then, the people just did an excellent job of it.
I think a lot of people, they give the whole limited or planned animation like a hard time, and they don't kind of see it in the perspective of the time. They don't realize the money that Bill and Joe were kind of working with to start off with, like per episode, and the demands of the schedule, and how revolutionary it actually was. There were a ton of talented people at that studio, like remarkably talented people. Those shows kind of are what they are because of those people, but you maybe didn't get to see the heights of their talents just because of the limitations of the production schedule and the resources kind of available. I was talking with somebody who had done some music for one of the most recent shows, and he wasn't really all that familiar with kind of the history. And as we were kind of talking about it, and I was telling him, what I know, and he was telling me kind of what he knows or what his perspective of it was, and he was like, okay, so they weren't making the great American novel, they were putting out magazines. And I'm like, that's actually not a bad analogy. Yeah, and of course that was the whole thing, is that Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, they worked at MGM just like Warner Brothers. Those were the two major studios outside of Disney. And at MGM, they created Tom and Jerry, and they did all those cartoons that played before the movies. So you used to see like a newsreel and a cartoon, and then you'd maybe get a double feature. So the whole movie industry was a lot different back then too. And when they started cutting out the cartoon, because they're expensive. They were very expensive to do, and really didn't bring a whole lot to the feature. It was just a little extra thing. And when they started phasing those out, Hanna-Barbera had to figure a way to make things cheaper and try to get them on TV, and that's why they came up with the limited animation system. It wasn't meant to look unbelievably amazing. It was meant to be inexpensive enough that you could still do good animation and get the jokes across in these cartoons they were doing. And it worked terrific. The Flintstones was an amazing TV show. Yeah.
Very well written and great jokes, and animated just fine. It was limited animation, but it did not look like it was badly done. I mean, it was very, very well done.
And so often, like the background paintings were amazing and detailed, or just really kind of expressionistic or impressionistic with their use of color and shape, and the way it played off of the more simpler figures in the foreground was really great. Yeah,
the style of Bedrock. I mean, boy, what an awesome looking town that was, And when you go a little further forward, and when I started working on He-Man, man, the He-Man backgrounds are just beautiful. I mean, they're amazingly well painted and just really designed good. And geez, I really, really loved what they did with the backgrounds at Filmation. We had some really good background painters. And it was a little bit more complicated than like the Flintstones or the Jetsons, because it was, more in a real world. But the backgrounds were quite amazing. And, when it came to the He-Man era, we had the same problem where we had to cut corners again. We had to save money because in 1981, there were probably 7 or 8 studios you could work at. And after 1981, there was one studio you could work at because they closed all the studios and sent all the work over to Japan and Korea. So we were almost, phased out completely, except for, thank goodness, for Lou Scheimer at Filmation, who said he would never send work overseas. So as soon as I heard that, I called up Filmation and tried to move over there. And luckily I got in early enough that the big push for people to move over when they lost their jobs, I didn't have that problem. I got in early. So that kind of saved my career. And it was really the unions that were wanting so much money and so much pension, health care, and everything was so expensive that it was just making the cartoons way too expensive, so that the networks couldn't afford them anymore. So we were kind of putting ourselves out of business, but the stupid union demanded like double the pay, and they just said, forget it, and they closed everything. So, and I always used to say back at the time, what good is making $50 an hour if you work 0 hours? So that's kind of what killed the animation studios. And like I said, thank goodness for Filmation. But then you had 25% of every episode had to be reused animation.
Yeah.
So they came up with a stock system where if a character walked in, they could walk in and talk, and it was already drawn. So all we had to do was film whatever mouths they were going to be speaking with and whatever eye blinks you needed. And that way we could fill in part of the storyline with stock animation, and that was good enough to keep our budgets low enough that we could compete with the low budgets of the Japan and Korea. And of course, He-Man was such a big hit that really put Filmation on the map as a major player. And we got probably about another eight years or so out of that before Westinghouse, who owned Filmation, decided they wanted to sell the company. And while they promised to sell it to a company that would keep the studio open, the people that bought it immediately closed the studio as soon as they bought it. So that kind of killed the last remaining U.S. animation studio.
In so many cases, animation on television is always fighting with time and budgets. If the stories are there, or if the characters are there, or even if the jokes are there, like I remember as a kid, you kind of picked up on it, but if you were invested in the show, if you were interested in the characters, you're older than me, and I'm older than a lot of people listening to my show, but like I did grow up in that time where you had your Saturday morning cartoons and like that was it. You kind of watched anything animated when you were a kid because it was rarefied air. And looking back on it now, I watched a lot of really low rent shows just because they were animated. But the reason why we're still talking about Huckleberry Hound or Yogi Bear or He-Man or the 67 Spider-Man or whatever, like it's because there was some passion there. There was something else going on that kind of compensated for their limited resources. Yeah, absolutely. And I hear it all the time. People come up to me, and the first thing, it's almost been a joke because people will come up and they'll go, "Hey, you drew my childhood." And it's like, well, yeah, I guess I did, but it was my adulthood.
So, and I grew up, in the early 60s when Saturday morning cartoons first started. So I grew up with that same, Friday night excitement that I'm going to get up early on Saturday and watch the cartoons. And so I lived that whole thing too, so that when I finally started in the business, I could really appreciate what we were doing, where a lot of the people that I worked with didn't even really care. They were just there for the job. I was there because, gosh, I can't believe I'm doing something that I used to love when I was a kid. So I knew that when I was going to Comic-Cons that I was representing a whole lot of people that want to meet the animator. I would have killed to have met some of these animators when I was a kid, but we didn't have Comic-Cons. So now that I'm the guy, that's the weirdest part about it, is me being the guy that's meeting the people. It just seems kind of surreal. But when they come up and say that, I really understand exactly what they're saying, because that's exactly what I felt like.
Yeah. Was there anyone at the studio while you were working there that you were just kind of thrilled to be working around, or that you would find excuses to kind of go and talk to or soak up some wisdom from or anything?
Well, yeah. And like I mentioned, Dave Tendler, and he was just a little teeny short guy, probably was in his late 60s at the time, always wore this little bow tie, always dressed really good for coming to work, because most of us were just blue jeans and T-shirts, but him being the old school, he was pretty dressed up. And he would always take the time and help me. And if I had something that I wasn't sure of, I would go in and ask him. Another guy was one of my great heroes, Jack Kirby, creator of all those great Marvel comics. He worked there, and I saw him one day walking across the bridge between the two buildings, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't realize he was working there. And he was doing designs, and I stopped him in the middle of the bridge, and he just put his portfolio down, and we sat there 20 minutes talking. And any one of the animators, there were a number of guys that were, because I was like 26. So anybody that was like in their 40s or 50s had been doing this for some time. And they would always, almost to a man, if you came in their room, they would just pull whatever they had off and help you figure out what your particular problem was and help you learn something. And, that's invaluable when you're a young kid trying to learn from the bottom, Do
you think that was just in their character, or do you think do you think they might have felt the responsibility to be kind of passing that mantle on? Because when you think of sort of the history of animation, like there's kind of a group of people that were there, at the beginning. I mean, it was very similar with comic books as well. And then you get that generation that comes in that kind of grew up on the stuff that you created. And I guess you could either be upset about that or, pleased that your work meant something and it's kind of moving forward.
Yeah, I think it was a mix of both, because like I said, I've known people that really, it was a struggle for them to work. They didn't really want to do this. They didn't like the shows they were working on. It was a paycheck.
Yeah.
But still, amongst most of those people that are even that way, I didn't meet a lot of people that were really nasty people. They were usually pretty friendly people. And if somebody came up to them, they would help them out. If they were in a real rush or a crunch time or something to get something done, they might not have been able to help you. But I don't really have any stories where I went up and asked somebody a question and they just kind of blew me off. So I have to assume that it was pretty much in their personality to be helpful.
I know with art, I mean, there's always the potential for some ego. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, well, that definitely is part of it. But I think most people like to be the one to help out the young guy.
Yeah.
And hopefully he won't take their job.
I apologize for all the kind of like technical stuff, but you are technically the first animator I've had on the show. I've usually had writers and directors, and I'm really curious about sort of this aspect.
So you mean the non-talented?
The what?
People. You had the non-talented people.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Right. I'm really curious about this aspect of the sort of the studio and the process and the functioning. And you were kind of there, I guess, in the middle is maybe a good way as far as the kind of history of the studio. What was kind of the process starting as the assistant animator? Like, what kind of hours did a day entail for you? How long were you actually In the trenches in the studio.
Yeah, it was, by the time I got there, because I know early on that things were not quite as regimented as they got later on, but it really was pretty good. We had to be there 8:30. We had a 10:30 break. We had a 12:30 lunch for an hour. We had a 3:30 break, and then we left at 5. So that was any studio I ever worked at, because I worked at Ruby Spears, Hanna-Barbera, Filmation, another little place called Bear Animation. It was always those same hours, because it was it wasn't like a union rule, but because everybody was in the union, that kind of was just the way they ran things. There were no time clocks. You just came in because you knew you had to do. At Filmation, I can remember it was 80 feet of film. A foot of film is 16 frames. A second of film is 24 frames. So we had to do a little bit less than a second to get 1 foot. We had to do 80 feet per week. Now that entailed how long each scene that you had to do. So if you had a 10-foot scene, well, you're 1/8 the way there. Sometimes you get a bunch of 4-foot scenes. It would just quick cut. Sometimes you get a scene where it was the opening scene where the camera's just kind of closing in on a building and it's kind of just getting closer and closer and closer. There's no characters. You still got to take that as your footage for the week. So that might be, 15 feet right there, and you didn't even have to draw anything. But a lot of times you were given those scenes because you were also given very difficult scenes to do. So that was to kind of offset that, knowing that you had some really hard work to do. They gave you something that was kind of easy to do to augment it so it wasn't too hard to make your 80 feet. Later on, at Filmation, we were in such a crunch that they started saying if you could do 160 feet a week, they would give you 2 paychecks. So if you had a week where you started out getting fairly easy stuff to do, that was the week to just go ahead and work the weekend and really put some time in and get double your paycheck. So that was really when things got super fun as far as, because I was a young single guy making some extra cash. And there was always contract work, which meant that every episode had a certain number of scenes that you could take home and do them in the evening in addition to the 80 feet that you were going to do. And usually we took those as much as you could get. And it was usually maybe an additional 25 feet, 30 feet, something like that, which is significant because you were getting, a certain amount per foot. And that was just, that was just gravy money. You were going to get extra for that. And it was kind of a pain having to take it home and work at night. But we had bills and everything else and, desires to buy that motorcycle that we wanted. But as far as the hours are, that was it. I mean, you had to do 80 feet. If you didn't do 80 feet, then you were working the weekend until you got 80 feet.
Fair enough.
If you got it done early, you didn't have to worry about working on the weekend. So you had to, because some days, I'm telling you, you come into work and you just don't feel like drawing. And to have to pump out that much work sometimes was just difficult to do. So you would just say, I'm taking today and just kind of coasting because I'm just burnt out or whatever. And then you would make up for it by working on the weekend.
So who would divvy up the scenes? Who determined who was doing what?
Well, I was never an animator at Hanna-Barbera. I was only an assistant. But when I was an animator at Filmation, they had, maybe 10 directors, and each director got a show, an episode of one of the shows, and they were in charge of taking the storyboard and breaking down the scenes to how long each scene was going to be, called slugging the board, which means you take the storyboard and you mathematically figure out how long each scene has to be so that you end up with exactly the right number of scenes to the commercial, and then it's going to end at exactly the right time. And this is like to the second. And I don't know what the total was, whether it was 22 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever it was back then. But you had to figure it out to that, and then they would break those scenes down and say, okay, this is a batch of scenes that can be done in this week, and they try to figure out 80 feet worth to give you. And sometimes they wouldn't give you 80 feet. You might have to pick up 2 different shows that week. But the directors are the ones that divvied it out. We had a little wheel out near their rooms where whatever arrow was pointing to what director, that's who you went to if you needed work. And then they just would hand out until they ran out of work and then move it to the next arrow for the next director. And it was a pretty good way to do it, I thought. And then they would announce that they have some contract work if anybody's interested. So then anybody that was interested would go and pick up the contract work. And a lot of people didn't want the contract work because these are the guys that are like, 55, 60 years old that are like, I don't want to work the weekend. And they're fast enough to make enough money during the week, and they didn't need any extra cash, unlike us young bucks that wanted as much money as we could get.
So you're at Hanna-Barbera, you're working as an animation assistant. Were you, as far as the shows that you were working on, I'm basically leading up to how you got on to Scooby Goes Hollywood and the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show. Did they just look for kind of whoever wasn't doing anything, or did they look for certain people with certain skills and were like, hey, you'd be really good for this show? Or did you actually kind of pitch or request a show that you wanted to be on?
Nope. Because we had the new Fred and Barney show, Challenge of the Super Friends, Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, the Schmoo show, Godzilla, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. So there were 5, 6, 7 shows that we were working on all at one time. And when you ran out of work, you would just go to, at Hanna-Barbera, if I remember correctly, we went to, they had some of the directors handed all the work to, and then they would just hand it out from there. They were the production managers. So we didn't really meet with the directors as an assistant because the work was already animated by the animator. Sometimes the animator would just say, okay, this is the stuff I want you to work on next, once he animated it. But it didn't always work that way. Sometimes I would just go pick up from somebody else because their stuff wasn't ready to be worked on yet. So there were a couple different ways at Hanna-Barbera to get the work. But you just walked in and they said, okay, this week you're on Scooby-Doo, and then that's what you worked on that week.
Sweet.
And sometimes if you heard that, they were working on some show that you really didn't want to work on, you'd kind of take your time getting the work done that you were working on and wait until the good stuff was out that you really wanted to work on. But eventually you had to pick up, and if the timing wasn't right, you're just stuck working on something you really didn't want to work on. But for the most part, I can't remember anything I really didn't enjoy working on. Everything was kind of a new, exciting thing to work on.
So you didn't work on a show, you worked for the studio, essentially.
Correct. Yeah. You were just I was an assistant animator for Hanna-Barbera, and whatever show they gave me, that's what I worked on. Sometimes there'd be commercial, there'd be a commercial for an episode, like to introduce the new Fred and Barney show, and they'd have like a 1 minute or 2 minute commercial, and we'd work on the commercial because, of course, we had to do it. So sometimes you got to do stuff like that. Sometimes you're doing the opening credits scenes, which was always kind of cool because they showed that every episode. So you constantly got to see your work.
So trying to keep it a little bit more Scooby focused at the moment. When you got on Scooby, were there shows that were like cooler to work on, or because this had, more realistic looking people rather than, drawing the people of Bedrock or, the Jetsons, that cartoony versus...
Sure, but I think it was more depending on the individual animator or assistant animator. It depended on what they liked. Because, like I said, I'm a superhero fan, so I loved working on Super Friends. But I loved the Flintstones. So to be able to sit there and... I've got a drawing here that is the very first drawing I ever did at Hanna-Barbera. It's a Fred Flintstone. It's from an episode of the new Fred and Barney show where he inherits a whole bunch of money. And he's so excited, he's jumping up and down all around Dino. And the very first drawing I did, I took it down to the Xerox department. They put it on a cell and had it painted for me. And then they gave me a Flintstone background. So I have the very first drawing I ever did on a cell. And that's kind of the type of person I am. A lot of people couldn't give a crap if they've got anything that they did.
Yeah.
I kept everything. I kept everything.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I've still got my He-Man desk. I've got the same animation desk that I worked on He-Man.
Nice.
Yeah, because when they closed the studio, they had no need for the desks. So for $75, $75, I bought the animation desk and the shelving unit and the lamp that I had. So I've still got that. So
I probably would have done the same.
Yeah, I love it.
And this is why it's a shame we're doing this by phone, because that would have been amazing to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of times I'm doing it like on Zoom or something else, and I just pick up the phone and take it over there and show the people what I've got. Because I've got a lot of collectibles, too, you know, a lot of statues and stuff like that from the shows I worked on. And it's a pretty cool studio I've got out here.
Nice. Yeah, you know, I'm finding it hard to, like, keep it Scooby focused.
Yeah, well, there's so many things I've worked on. But Scooby,
I know.
Scooby, of course, was the ultimate. I mean, you know, if you talk about shows that the only thing that would have beaten Scooby for me would have been Johnny Quest.
Oh, yes.
Because I was still a kid when Johnny Quest came out, and it was like, holy crap, is this a good show? And Scooby being from 1969, you know, I was in high school then. So, I mean, I was a little old for Scooby-Doo, but I still watched it just because I loved cartoons. And so to finally get to work on Scooby, I mean, it was, you know, it was a huge deal.
Johnny Quest is actually, well, it was basically a toss-up between doing a Johnny Quest podcast or a Scooby-Doo podcast, and I think I just thought I'd probably have a better chance of talking to, like, surviving cast and crew with Scooby-Doo over Johnny Quest. Yeah. But that was the show where I made reference to the, you know, the cartooniness of the Flintstones and the more realism of, like, Scooby-Doo or Super Friends. Johnny Quest is infamous for a few episodes where it was such a difficult show to do and to keep the quality up, and there's a couple episodes where you know that, you know, they probably handed some scenes off to the people doing the Flintstones or the more cartoony, you know, animal shows, because it's just such a tonal shift. I think the Yeti episode is one of the best examples of that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and, you know, that happened. You know, you get in crunch time, and it's like, well, we got to give this to some people who really don't want to do it. I remember we had to do there was this big scene. I don't remember what show it was, but there were a bunch of bears, and they had gotten this jar of honey, and they were all sitting in a circle in the woods, and they were handing the honey jar around, sticking their hand in it or their paw in it and getting a whole bunch of honey and handing it on to the next guy. And the scene had to be done, and it was a really complicated scene with a lot of characters and a lot of animation, and they handed it out to about like 6 or 7 people to do. And when you watch the scene, the bears grow in size and then they shrink in size, and because they just didn't keep it consistent. Because, like I said, they gave one group 6 drawings and another group 6 drawings, and, well, these 6 drawings don't look anything like that 6 drawings. So there was nobody there to keep the quality there.
But the show got done.
Yeah, but it got done, and it made the air date. So that was the more important thing.
And that was also a time where nobody knew we were going to be having VHS and DVDs and that any of this stuff would ever be revisited.
Right.
So...
Right. The only way it was ever revisited is if somebody showed it as a rerun on TV.
Yeah. Basically, some network would have to have it.
Yeah.
Sitting in their backlog, yeah. Circling Scooby again, were there any favorite episodes or characters or experiences during that period? I know that was... People looking back on it, I mean, there's all the scrappy hate that's sort of going around and has been going around for a long time. But during that period, everybody I've talked to said that it was a time of, like, reinvention. Like, there was a lot of excitement around the show and the character because it was kind of going to go away, and it sort of avoided the chopping block with bringing in Scrappy and having it stick around.
I never realized. I mean, it really wasn't until I started doing Comic-Cons pretty regularly that I was doing my panel, and I came to a point where I mentioned Scrappy, and people booed. And I was like, wait a minute. People don't like Scrappy? And they're all, yeah, we hate him. It's like, but there was equal amounts that liked him, but I couldn't believe so many people hated him because I always thought it was such a cute idea to have this little teeny dog that was fearless and have Uncle Scoob be scared of his own shadow, and he's a giant Great Dane. So I thought that was really kind of cute. And outside of the irritating puppy power that he used to say, I never found him to be that irritating. I kind of liked that he had, that little innocent arrogance and false bravery. And so I was really shocked to find so many people didn't like him.
I think a lot of the negative feelings came because of that period where it was they basically got rid of the gang. It was just Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy, and they went to the shorter format, and they were kind of more gag oriented. I think having the lack of those, the comedian and the straight man, right? The funny guy and the straight man, and Velma, Daphne, and Fred, they're a counterbalance to Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy eventually.
Yeah.
And to remove them, it unbalanced things a little bit. And as a kid, it didn't bother me as much. But again, you grow up and you go back on it, and it maybe just doesn't have.
Yeah, I know. I guess I can see what you're saying. It is losing Velma and Daphne and Fred would, get people upset, I'd imagine. My favorite's Velma. So it's funny because we have a lot of Velmas cosplaying at the Comic-Cons, and it's always our thing to get a picture with the Velma, But yeah, so that part I can kind of see, but I don't think it's really right to blame Scrappy. Yeah, he was so easy to draw and so cute, and I thought, what a great addition, and then to find out years later that so many people hated him.
It's funny because Warner Brothers, various creatives within kind of the Scooby circles now, who've been working on the direct-to-video movies and the television shows, they've all sort of tried to take a kick at that cat and bring Scrappy back in some way. And they're usually thwarted by kind of the executives above. Warner doesn't want to go there because I think they're just afraid of any sort of potential backlash. But I mean, any character, if written well, if integrated well with whatever show, like whatever kind of version of the show that you're doing. They recently brought back Flim Flam. I don't know how familiar you are with Flim Flam from 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. And he just kind of had a small role in The Curse of the 13th Ghost direct-to-video movie. I was a person who could barely stand to watch Flim Flam, and I really enjoyed him in that film just because the context was different and he was relevant to the story. And it's all about context and presentation.
Yeah, well, that's one of the key things in everything. And one of the things that really disappointed me about Challenge of the Super Friends, or even any of the Super Friends, is that they were never like the characters in the comic book because it wasn't comic book people writing the stories. And it always seemed like they're missing the whole market. Yeah, I know that's Batman and Superman's costume, but that's not Superman in the costume the way he's written.
But they also had the limitation of they weren't allowed to do anything violent. They weren't allowed to hit each other. They weren't allowed to fight.
Yeah, I know. That's the same problem we had with He-Man. How do you have an action-adventure show where nobody can show any action?
I think I heard you say in another interview somewhere that they couldn't even hit swords.
Yeah, I don't think they ever clashed swords. They always had some beam come out of either his Skeletor's staff or He-Man's sword, and he'd point the sword off stage, and the effects would go off stage. You'd hear an explosion and see the camera shake, and then they'd pan over to a smoking mass of rubble, but they wouldn't even show it blow up. And I think part of it was not just that it was going to have to be drawn blowing up, but I think part of it was they just didn't want to show anything blowing up just because of the people at that time that were trying to put everybody out of business because of the violence.
Yeah. And I'm curious, we've talked about sort of a lot of different aspects of your career and the animation industry. You keep coming back to He-Man. I'm getting the sense that He-Man was a favorite experience of yours.
Well, it was a favorite experience because it was such a favorite experience for everybody. It was probably the biggest cartoon ever. They sold billions of dollars worth of toys and everything on that cartoon in just a 3-year period. It was just huge. And that's the main focus at Comic-Cons, is everybody loves He-Man. And Scooby's right up there. Scooby's up there. Super Friends is up there. But right now, if you were around 45 years old, your whole life was impacted by He-Man, which instead of just being on once a week was on 5 times a week. So, I mean, it was huge.
He-Man was one of those shows for me. My local television station did not get it. And we only had like the 2 or 3 channels. I don't know who was carrying it, but I never saw it. And I only had one friend who had the toys. And I only visited him a couple times, like to play He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. But it was a cultural sort of touchstone as far as like 80s toys and cartoons that I sort of passed me by. It was something that...
Now, how old are you now?
I'm 47.
Okay, see, you would have been perfect.
Yeah, I was like right in the sweet spot.
Yeah.
I was huge on G.I. Joe.
Yeah, but see, the reason is it was syndicated. So instead of being on the big 3, CBS, ABC, NBC, it was on the off channel.
Fair
so
enough.
It was on here in the U.S., it was like Channel 5 or Channel 11 or Channel 9 or Channel 13. And we sold it to all those channels all across the U.S. And it was on like 3:30 in the afternoon. So you'd get home from school, race home from your bus stop to be able to watch it. So if you didn't get a chance to do that, that's why it didn't get a chance to impact you like it did everybody else.
There you go.
Yeah, and
you just explained a hole in my childhood.
Yeah, it was the whole thing about it being syndicated that was brand new. We had so much trouble with the networks trying to put us out of business that we finally had this chance to do something and just do a series that isn't even sold yet and then sell it after the fact.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We got the show done, put it up on the market, and every market in the United States and really pretty much all over the world ended up buying it. I know we had some people on one of the Facebook pages that was saying that he remembers watching it Saturday morning, and I said, well, then you didn't see it first run then, because it wasn't on Saturday morning. It was on during the week. And, he was saying he saw it in like the late 80s. Well, that's, 6 years after it came on the air.
Yeah.
So that's why you didn't have that experience of seeing it every day after school. But imagine what impact that would have, being every single day getting out of school and racing home to watch the show. That's got to impact you even more than watching something Saturday mornings only.
My most vivid memory of any Filmation show, there was always a segment of the show that was like so beautifully animated. It was either a character movement or just like some sequence. And it was a sequence that was likely repeated episode after episode. Batman swinging through the Gotham night sky or whatever it happened to be. And having seen that as a kid, I remember thinking, because that animation was so fluid and so nice, I know that these people can do this. There's just some reason they're not doing this.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. There just wasn't enough time. I say to people all the time, I said, all the people that I worked with at Filmation, they got totally ripped for doing lousy animation and the things just don't move good and blah, blah. Well, these are all the same people that worked on Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. They all ended up working at Disney. So they had the talent. We didn't have the time. We didn't have the time or money. And the important part was to get the story out. And, of course, we would love to have animated it fully, but we just can't do it. Remember, when we were doing Scooby-Doo or Challenge of Super Friends, it was 13 episodes per season. So you'd have Saturday morning for 13 weeks, and then you could show reruns for another 13 weeks, and then either put it back in the same rotation again or whatever, but that's all it was 13 episodes for a season. When it came to He-Man, we had to do 65 episodes in a season, so that means 65 episodes in 52 weeks. That's more than an episode a week. So how are we supposed to make that move fluidly?
Yeah.
You can't. And it's not that we couldn't do it, we just didn't have the time to do it.
And the way television animation looks now, I mean, I know they have a lot of... Television will just always have a certain amount of restrictions to it. But the technology has changed and techniques have changed, and obviously stuff looks kind of better or more fluid, or there's styles that accommodate it more. And I find myself often defending sort of the limited animation of the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
A lot of stuff today, since it's all done on the computer, is they're just taking like the person's hair shape and they just can maneuver it in the computer. So it's not drawn. It's not, it's what they used to call, when I haven't worked for quite a while in that type of thing, but when we were working in Flash, it was called a symbol, and you could take each symbol and stretch it and squash it and do whatever you wanted to with it, but it was the same symbol. You would draw an arm, and then you would just move the arm as if it was like almost like paper cutouts. It would be the same arm, and you would just make it move, but you weren't having to redraw that arm.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that is what they're doing today, is just changing the shapes of things and stretching them around. And you'll see them hold something, and it's the same body maybe for the first 6 frames, and then it'll hit something, and they'll squash it and stretch it, and it makes it look like it's animated, but it's exactly the same shape. They've just misshapen it to make it look like animation.
Yeah.
So it can be effective, but when you look at it, it's really not any better animated. It's just you can maneuver the symbols faster and cheaper than you could actually redraw everything.
Looking at we've discussed how incomplete the filmography is, but looking at your filmography on IMDb, I'm noticing like most of the shows tend to be in the sort of adventure or like superhero or very much kind of genre shows. And I was wondering if that's kind of a trajectory that you sort of maintained, or is that just, where the work was? I mean, obviously there's some deviations, but is that just something that you were kind of attracted to?
Well, yes, I was attracted to it, but no, I didn't go towards that, other than that just happened to be what I worked on. There's a bunch of stuff in there, like I worked on Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll, Droopy, some of the stuff that was old Terry Toons, Warner Brothers stuff. I worked on Tiny Toons, and Tiny Toons, I mean, you can't get any more toonier than that.
Yeah. Was that the Bakshi Mighty Mouse?
No. Filmation did a version in the early 80s.
Okay.
And we got I don't know how we got it, but we got Heckle and Jekyll, Mighty Mouse, and Droopy the dog, the one that used to be, "Hello, Joe."
Yep.
And,
that's a pretty good Droopy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so we did that, and then a little bit later on, and none of this shows up on my IMDb page, is because I became a director, and I directed episodes of King of the Hill. I did 1 episode of The Simpsons, a thing called PB&J Otter. I worked on Savage Dragon, Road Rovers, a number of things that I was a director on that they don't show up because I did it all contract work through the mail. I was living in Seattle, and they would just FedEx me the show, and I'd do it and send it back to them. I think that the Happily Ever After fairy tales are on there.
Yes, they are. That
I did for HBO. But I think I did 10 of them, and it only shows like 3 or 4 of them.
Yep.
And that was kind of fun because I told you about the director where they slugged the board, and I would go and slug the board, and I would have to call them up and say, "Hey, this show isn't long enough. There's no way for me to stretch this storyboard to fit the time that we have." And so they would go, "Well, just make some stuff up, add it to it." So I actually had to make up gags and put them into so that was extra kind of fun, I came up with some funny little things and added it in. So, but yeah, so a bunch of that stuff, like, I don't know if Thumbelina is down there. I did work on Thumbelina, the Don Bluth, We're Back, a dinosaur story. Stay Tuned. I worked with Chuck Jones on Stay Tuned. We did a thing called RoboCat. It was There was a live-action movie with Pam Dauber and John Ritter called Stay Tuned, and at one point they get turned into these little cartoon mice, straight out of the Chuck Jones, art book, and it was really great to be able to work on that thing. And then later on, I actually got a call from Chuck Jones asking if I wanted to head up their assistant animation department, and he said, I want to have lunch with you tomorrow. And I said, well, I don't think you realize you just called Seattle, because I live in Seattle. And he goes, oh, I thought you were here in LA. I said, no. I said, they sent me all the work through the mail. And he said, well, we heard so many good things about you. We were willing to send the stuff out, but I didn't realize you were sending it that far. And I said, yeah, but I'd have to be in LA, right? And they said, yeah, you'd have to come and live in LA. I said, no, I just escaped from LA. I don't want to go back. But it was still pretty nice being asked by Chuck Jones, to head up his assistant animation department.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask, again, at your time at Hanna-Barbera, if you'd had any kind of interaction or contact with Iwo Takamoto or Joe and Bill.
Not any much. With Joe and Bill, it was more when I first went in to apply for that class. Remember I told you when the teacher recommended me, I had to take my portfolio in, and I took it to a guy named Harry Love, who was in charge of that class. And Harry Love's, as soon as he saw my portfolio, he called up Joe, and Joe Barbera came down to look at my portfolio. And he said, gosh, we would hire you right this instant, but we don't have anywhere to put you. We're building a new building, and until that's done, we don't have any seats. So hang in there, and we'll probably be hiring you. And that's really the only time I really talked with Joe, except maybe one other time at a party. But Bill was a lot more friendly, and I had numerous occasions to talk to him, even when I was working across the street at another little studio. And he came over because it was like the anniversary of this little teeny studio, and he was friends with Dale Bear, who was the head of the studio. And we got to talk to him a little bit more. With Iwo Takamoto, I don't think I ever talked to Iwo Takamoto. He seemed to really stay in his room and not come around. So he's the only guy I didn't really have much contact with.
Fair enough. It's just interesting to... It seems like, because I know Bill ran kind of like the production end, and Joe was more on like the sales and the kind of creative, the writing end, story end, and Iwo obviously on the art side. So talking to different people, like different people sort of have different levels of engagement and different stories and whatnot. Yeah. It seems like most of the writers who went through the studio kind of tended to have some sort of contact with Joe, and most of the artists tended to have some kind of contact with, Bill, because if they're working there, Bill's sort of managing that. Yeah. Right. So.
Yeah, I just wasn't big enough yet, being just this rookie assistant animator. I was just trying to get my feet on the ground, and I was in awe of the two of them, just the fact that it was, actually Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera that I was talking to just kind of freaked me out. But with Iwo, I just, I don't really know why I didn't. I really think he just didn't walk around like some of the other guys did. There's another guy, his named George Singer. George Singer had a lot to do with sort of advertising, and he did a lot of the drawings you'll see of like Quick Draw and Baba Louie in a situation, just a single frame, single panel joke or something like that. He did a whole lot of those with most of the characters, and ended up he was one of my best friend's dad's best friend. And I remember when I first got the job, my friend said, do you know a guy named Bill Singer? And I said, I do. I said, he's a pretty big guy at Hanna-Barbera. And he said, yeah, that's my dad's best friend. So in that way, I got to go talk to him a number of times over in his office. But he was also, up in years a little bit. And, I don't think he really lived too much past the 80s. The one guy that I did get to work with a little bit, but really didn't know him very well, was Tex Avery.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he was still there. He was still working in the business. And so we saw him around from time to time. Kind of really quiet, unassuming, which you would kind of think that's kind of strange for some guy that just drew absolutely, maniac animation.
Yeah.
He was he created somebody called Quickie Koala, which was the only show I ever worked on that was like a Tex Avery show. And you'll see it's not written down there that I worked on it, but I did. But he was maybe 1 year later he passed away. I mean, it didn't take him very long before he was gone. Got to meet Bob Clampett, but not through Hanna-Barbera at all. A friend of mine had worked on the old Beanie and Cecil show, and I had told him, this is when I was working at Ruby Spears, I told him that I was a big Bob Clampett fan. And, later on in the day, he kind of waves me over to his office and says, here, the phone's for you. And I go, what? And I pick up the phone. He goes, hi, this is Bob Clampett. So I was like, I don't know what to say. I love you. So.
Yeah, I totally forgot to ask anything about Ruby Spears.
Yeah, Ruby Spears was a fun place. It was just not a very long tenure because right at that time is when the animation studios went on strike, and I hightailed it over to Filmation. Right. Even though they promised that we were going to. At that point, the actors in Hollywood all went on strike in 1980. So John Wayne was on strike. Everybody was on strike. So that meant Mel Blanc was on strike, and Mel Blanc did the voice for Heathcliff, the cat. And so he couldn't come in and do the voice tracks. And if you don't have a voice track, there's nothing you can animate to. So they had to lay us all off. It wasn't very smart of them to not get this done because they let Mel Blanc go on vacation knowing that this strike was looming. And so it kind of messed up Ruby Spears pretty bad, and they ended up having to get out of their building that they had just purchased, this beautiful new building, and I really liked working there, but it just became obvious that they were in over their heads, and they never did hire anybody back. They sent all the work overseas. And so that was I was there for about a year, I think, and did Plastic Man, Heathcliff, Mighty Man and the World's Ugliest Dog, Yuck, Rickety Rocket, Fang Face, a few things like that.
There's a person within the Scooby-Doo fan community that kind of follows on social media. He's chomping at the bit for a Fang Face DVD release. He's like, when is this going to happen?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I know. I've got, every show that I've ever worked on, basically, I have in my print collection that I take to the shows in case somebody wants to buy an autograph print. And Fang Face, I've had one person even know what it was. Really? So, it's just, it wasn't a big hit. Yeah, I mean, they all know who Heathcliff is. Very few know Rickety Rocket. Rickety Rocket was kind of like the Ruby Spears version of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. So it was all black characters, and it was drawn in the same style and everything else, except it was kind of a more futuristic. They were in this rocket that they would fly around in. And I've had only a few people know what that was, and those were the black guys that came up to me that remember it because, they were looking for anything that had black characters in it back then. Yeah. I have only vague recollection of that show. Yeah. I mean, really. And I worked on a few episodes, but, I could never tell you what the episodes were. Yeah. I just remember doing it. So is the convention circuit kind of how you spend your time as far as animation and fan engagement? Yeah, except this year. Well, yeah, obviously. Yeah, I've had 12 cons canceled already this year. So that's hurt big time. Yeah. I had one about a month ago in Missouri, and it was right when they started lifting a little bit of the restrictions. And as soon as he got permission to do it, they started clamping down again. So he managed to just get in there at the right moment. I'll tell you, it was a little teeny con in Missouri, and I did gangbusters at this thing. I mean, it was like everybody was just chomping at the bit to come out and buy stuff. And since it was so small, there were only like 2 or 3 of us there that were like, in quotes, stars. And so everybody came out to meet me. I mean, it was just awesome. Usually I have a good crowd, but this was like, for such a small show, I was really very overwhelmed with it. And in my panel, I mean, it was packed, and it was a really, really good experience. I just wish that all these other shows didn't have to close down, because it's really impacted my take-home pay this year.
Yeah. Hopefully, I mean, the way things are going, who knows when this will be under control again, but
that's the main way. I've got a Facebook page that's Tom Cook Animator, if anybody wants to find it. And I do updates there, and there haven't been updates for a while just because we haven't been doing anything con-wise. And then I belong to a couple Facebook pages, like I've got the Scooby-Doo page that I'm on. I've got a King of the Hill that I'm on. I've got a couple of Masters of the Universe ones, a She-Ra one. Because, of course, She-Ra was the big deal for the girls in the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
That was the show that was the first time that you had a woman that had her own show. You know, I mean, you had Wonder Woman, but she was part of an ensemble cast. And I get a lot of grown women, like, tearing up because She-Ra meant so much to them, you know?
Yeah, people underestimate representation.
Yeah, they're really touched by that thing.
When there's so little of it, yeah. Like,
yeah.
Any of it that's actually out there usually has an impact, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of most of my questions. And we've covered the fact that Velma's your favorite Scooby character. And since I should probably finish on a Scooby note, I will instead ask you if you had a favorite iteration of the show. You've worked on Scooby-Doo, Scrappy-Doo, but if someone was like, you got to sit down and watch some Scooby-Doo, which one would you pick?
I mean, I would pick the original. You know, I think some of the later ones, I just don't really care for the look. You know, some of it's obvious it's drawn in Japan and Korea because it has that really angular look with, supposed shadows, but really not done very well. Animation usually isn't that good. I think the original show looked pretty good, and I think the Scooby Scrappy show looked pretty good too, but it still was a step down from the original one. At least the style of the characters hadn't changed. I know I just saw some pictures of some new version that's got them, and they almost look like Simpsons characters with the big eyes and everything. I didn't like that at all.
Yeah, that one, they went for a very broad comedy style, and and they said it just wouldn't work with the original classic models.
Yeah,
the show would have just kind of collapsed, so they needed something a little more flexible.
But I wish they would just make it different characters then. Why are you trying to, don't ruin Scooby-Doo, come up with a new show.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question, because this show, it has been kind of invincible, and it has survived 50 years and is going to continue on for who knows how many more. And I always ask everybody I talk to what they think. What is the magic formula? Why is it this show has been so flexible and so steadfast and survived as long as it had, and is so beloved by so many people?
Yeah, I know it. And man, it's a tough one to put your finger on. I think the whole mystery thing is fun. I think that's something that even though at this point it's the butler, but it's funny because one of the shows I was at, we had a group of guys come through cosplaying as every character. They even had some guy in a big Scooby-Doo outfit that was just sweating bullets inside his Scooby-Doo costume. But it was great because what they did is they had me come out in front of my table, and they took a chair and put the chair there, and they had me sit down at the chair. And then the guy who was playing Fred pretended that he was pulling this rubber mask off my head, as if it was the animator did it. and they took some photos of that, and they all got that shocked look on their face with their flashlights and all that. It was really clever.
That's great.
But I think that's part of it is just I think people really like Shaggy, I think he's a great character. I don't know if you realize this, but there was a show when I was a kid called The Adventures of Dobie Gillis.
Yep.
And there was a character in that called Maynard G. Krebs, who was a beatnik, and that's who they took Shaggy from. He has that floppy sweatshirt on. He's got the little goatee just like him. And it was played by the guy that ended up playing Gilligan in Gilligan's Island.
Bob Denver, yeah.
Yeah, and that's who they based, just like they based the Flintstones on the Honeymooners. That was kind of their take on Shaggy, was to make him kind of a beatnik type character. And instead of, in the Dobie Gillis show, anytime anybody mentioned work, Maynard would freak out. So he would go, work, and it ended up, that's kind of like Scoob, that's kind of like Shaggy, work. That's almost kind of the voice they gave him, was Maynard when he said work. So I think they really did steal it from there. And of course, a really endearing character. And it just, who knows what some of these things, why they're popular, but boy, it sure was.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people just don't remember those shows at all. I mean, I talk about the Honeymooners and I get these, questions on their faces. It's like, gosh, how do you not know the Honeymooners? It was such a good show. But, it's so long ago. Part of the thing is, when I was growing up, they were playing those in rerun, and they just don't play anything in rerun anymore. I grew up thinking that Laurel and Hardy were still alive, and still doing their show. Well, they were still alive, but I mean, they were, in their 60s or 70s at that point.
Yeah.
And same thing with the Three Stooges. It was like I was seeing the stuff rerun over and over and over and over, thinking that it was pretty new. I mean, I had a crush on Shirley Temple because I thought Shirley Temple was still a kid. And I found out she was like in her 30s or something. So
it's kind of amazing to think that, everyone's quick to say Scooby-Doo was derivative of, Dobie Gillis and the Archies and whatever else was kind of around at the time. And Flintstones was derivative of the Honeymooners. And I can't remember who Yogi and Huckleberry Hound were kind of based on. Even Top Cat. Top Cat was based on
Sergeant Bilko.
Yes, that's the one.
Yep.
But so few people remember those shows that all of these other shows riffed on, but they remember Top Cat, they remember the Flintstones.
Yeah, because even Top Cat's voice was very similar to Phil Silvers.
Yeah.
It was always boys, 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 that type of thing. And that
was a good Top
Cat. And it was just very, very much like Top Cat. I just loved that show when I was a kid, I'll tell you.
I've just started rediscovering it. With this whole process of I started off wanting to just kind of do an oral history of Scooby-Doo, and then I was like, man, there's just not as much out there about kind of Hanna-Barbera as there is about, Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes and kind of all this other stuff, Disney, whatever. So I just kind of like broadened the scope, and I've been doing like a deep dive whenever I have time, reading the literature and like watching the old shows, and Top Cat just kind of came up, and I've been going through them and just really enjoying the heck out of them. Yeah,
it's really good. And the Scooby Goes to Hollywood that I worked on, there's a whole sequence where there's a character called the Groove, which is supposed to be like Fonzie.
Yes.
And I did Scooby as the Groove. So if you get to the part where you see Scooby-Doo dressed up like the Groove, I did that sequence in there. And when I met Henry Winkler, because I keep everything, I had those drawings, and I redid one and did a nice color version of it and gave it to Henry Winkler.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really great. He loved it.
Very cool. All right.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah, this was very fun. You've already mentioned where people can find you, and there's no conventions going on right now, so...
Yeah, nothing right now. Yeah, and if anybody's interested in, like, a commission, or they'd like me to draw something for them, you can also contact me at 80sanimator@gmail.com. That's 80s, 80sanimator@gmail.com.
All right, well, yeah, thanks again for coming on the show, Tom. It's been really great talking about your life in animation.
Yeah, no, I love this, and it's one of those things where even being 68 now, it's still, I have such vivid memories of my time in the studios. I've got friends that can't remember anything, and I just remember everything. I just had such a good time, and to think that I just fell into it accidentally was just like, God telling me this is what you're supposed to do. So It was awesome.
Well, fantastic. Well, best of luck in all your future endeavors, and you're welcome back on the show anytime.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
And that concludes my conversation with animator Tom Cook. I hope you all enjoyed hearing Tom's stories, the behind-the-scenes stories of working at Hanna-Barbera, Ruby Spears, and Filmation. I hope it wasn't maybe too deep of a dive into process. I'm kind of a history and process nerd, so when we started kind of going in that direction, that's just the direction it kept going. But I really enjoyed chatting with Tom, and if you're interested in finding out more about Tom or following him on social media, check him out on Facebook, facebook.com/TomCookAnimator. He posts all of his notifications for any conventions that he's going to be at, and you'll probably be able to find links to anywhere else you may be able to find him from there. I'm really happy to finally get this conversation out there. As a lot of you probably know, the podcast has been on a bit of a hiatus, and I had a couple of conversations that were already completed, like 6 months ago, and I've just been sitting on them. They've been collecting dust, and other stuff is going on, and they were just there, ready to be edited and mixed and all the stuff. So happy to finally kind of have the process going again, have this out there, have you guys be able to listen to it. Next up, I'm probably going to be putting up my conversation with Morgan Baden. She was the writer of the Daphne and Velma novel, The Dark Deception. We had a great conversation again. I think this was like 5 months ago. And we talked about the books and the process and all that jazz. So I've noticed Morgan's been really active with the books lately. Could be because a new book is supposed to be coming out soon. It's been delayed. The pandemic has delayed it, I think, twice now. That's just the way it is. That's just the way the last year has gone for so many people. But I've seen Morgan on Instagram and online, Twitter, just kind of promoting the crap out of Dark Deception again. And hopefully we get that third book soon. I'm looking forward to it. So that's what you have to look forward to after this. And if you want to support the show, like, share, subscribe, follow, all the things that you can do and click on. Word of mouth is a great thing. Tell somebody about the show, share it on your social media, rate and review where you can. It always helps with the algorithms. And just continue listening, continue clicking and downloading the show. Your support is wonderful and important, and I appreciate all of you. So with that, I will take my leave of you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will catch you again when I return with my conversation with Morgan Baden. Take care, stay safe, and remember...
Run now! Splat later!
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.